what kind of test equipment could you use to test these systems? There's a couple different testers out there. We have our diesel set that's able to actually measure all of our various pressures that we've gone through, all the different systems, all the different components, both a low pressure gauge, a high pressure gauge. We have a fuel quantity return device, which goes ahead and measures how much leakage I have off my injectors. I have a piezo injector load test box, so I can simulate the injector load on the ECU to determine whether the ECU is functioning properly or not. Let's take a look at measuring return quantity. And why would we want to measure return quantity? Well, we'd measure return quantity if we suspect an injector's got a surplus of leakage internally. And where could that internal leakage come from? Usually the biggest cause of this is contaminated fuel. If you remember how the injector functions, if we get contamination in the fuel, our little switchover valve, our sealing area, is going to cause a leakage in that zone. Anytime we have leakage across that switchover area, all that fuel is going to leak its way past the return. So in order to determine whether I've got a leaking injector or not, I can use my return quantity measurement device. And what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and connect each one of these up to the returns off of every injector. And every injector is going to have a connection up to these graduated cylinders. We're going to go ahead and start the vehicle and see what kind of return quantity we get out of the vehicle to determine whether I got one injector that is leaking greater than the other three, for example. So if we're measuring the return quantity, we got two different ways we can measure the return quantity. If you look at these cylinders, I've got a small section in the bottom that's there for testing during the cranking process. And I have the larger part of the cylinder for when the engine's running. So let's say we're trying to troubleshoot a no start condition. I couldn't build up rail pressure. All right, I confirmed I got an M prompt working, the pressure control valve is working, but I'm still not able to build up sufficient rail pressure. It could come down to a leaking injector. In order to test this, I can measure the return quantity, but the engine, since it's only cranking, it can only do a small amount of measurement. So as you can see in these examples we have here, as the engine's cranking over, I'm looking for a gross difference between the four cylinders. And as you can see, all four of them are not that significantly different from one another. Whereas the example on the other side, we can see where cylinder 1 is leaking significantly greater than cylinder number 4, 3, and 2. And in this instance, I would have a bad injector number 1 causing the potential no start condition. But if we have a vehicle that runs, we can take our measurements while the vehicle's sitting here idling, allowing that fuel to go ahead and fill up the larger part of the cylinders. So in our two different examples here, we can see as the engine's running, cylinder number 1 is filling up the beaker at a much greater rate than cylinders 2, 3, and 4. At this point, we would prove cylinder number 1 has got a surplus of leakage in there and I got a bad injector. Versus this other example where I do not have a gross difference between cylinders 1, 2, 3, and 4. So in that example, that's considered normal. Don't have a significant difference between all four cylinders.